All right, so this is take two because sometimes I can't really talk. So, welcome back to Critical Weight Theory. Even though sometimes I can be a bit of a silly Billy Dum Dum, I'm capable of having mindful moments. And in this particular episode, we're going to delve into the intricacies of human behavior and social interactions. I'm your host, Wade, and today we're exploring a question many of us have pondered. Why can't some people take jokes? So, interestingly enough, sometimes the people asking that question have themselves been offended at some point, so they could kind of answer their own question. But it's kind of a tricky thing because we're not always so quick to look at our own reactions, right? We're people who understand ourselves, but we don't necessarily understand what's going on in another person's vantage point. But humor is a universal human experience for the most part, though, of course, there are some people who seem pretty much humorless. But humor is not universally understood or appreciated in the same way. There are several reasons why some people might struggle to take jokes, and these reasons can be psychological, cultural, or contextual. So let's break it down a little bit. First, let's talk about personal sensitivity. Some individuals are naturally more sensitive, and this heightened sensitivity can make them more likely to take jokes personally. They might feel hurt by humor that others find harmless. This isn't necessarily a flaw, it's just how they're wired. Their reactions often stem from a deep place of empathy and emotion. Of course, you'll always find some people who can dish it out, but they can't take it when it comes to jokes. You know, I'm sure some of us even have been that person. And there's a little bit of a hypocritical element there, and I guess the remedy to that problem is to just take a step back and sort of ask yourself if you've ever been in that position. Maybe there are lessons to be learned if you were the one who was easily offended, yet at other times you've wondered why other people are so easily offended. But I read an interesting article on the or in the Globe and Mail where someone shared that they had trouble controlling their sensitivity to jokes. This might have been rooted in their past experiences, specifically experiences of maybe bullying or ridicule. And this brings us to our next point, which is about past experiences. People who have been bullied, and that would probably be most people who have been bullied or ridiculed at some point, or maybe they experienced trauma of a different type. While they often develop a lower tolerance for jokes, especially if the humor touches on their personal experiences or insecurities, these past experiences create emotional scars, making certain jokes feel like salt in the wound. And that's part of the problem with bullying is that often it ends up starting perhaps as like an innocent sort of thing, but then it just becomes a pattern, and indeed it becomes like salt intentionally being poured in the wound if it's an intentional pattern. So sometimes there can actually be a thin line between telling jokes and bullying. And, you also get into a little bit of a gray area when you ask the question, is all bullying equally as bad? Like there's a bit of a gray area to be discovered in some of these topics. And another critical factor is cultural variations. Humor varies significantly across cultures. What's considered hilarious in one culture might be confusing or even offensive in another. For example, in some cultures, making a joke about someone's weight might be seen as a lighthearted way of showing concern, or just acknowledging that's that someone is a certain way. It might not really be mean spirited, but in some other cultures, it might be considered deeply offensive. To make fun of somebody's weight or other aspects of their appearance. It's one of those things, and it can, of course, differ within various groups within a culture, within a greater culture, or like a nation, or however you want to put it. And some of it comes down to the individual level as well, of course. So you can find fascinating discussions about that, highlighting how cultural norms and values shape our perception of humor. And maybe you have some amazing or amusing anecdotes of your own that shed light on these different cultural approaches to humor. So, cultural norms are influenced by historical context and symbolism, which is interesting in its own right. For instance, a gesture or a word that is benign in one culture might be associated with a negative historical event in another. Well, I mean, an example of that would be like a white dude who shaves his head. For a lot of people, that would seem perfectly innocent. But, back in a certain time period, like, I don't know, maybe the 80s or 90s, there were more commonly found white nationalist skinheads, people who would shave their heads, and that was more commonly back then seen as, related to Nazism or something like that. I think that's died down significantly in recent years because I barely even hear anybody refer to skinheads. But, that would be one example. A relatively benign thing like shaving your head could be seen as something that's frightening. But another example would be the thumbs up gesture. It's positive in many Western cultures, but offensive in some parts of the Middle East. It's really equivalent to the middle finger in some places. So there are also language nuances that play a big role. Words that are polite in one language might be rude in another due to differences in slang and connotations. And just maybe the language itself is, creating an entirely different word out of different sounds. So, all of these things are interesting. So if you ever do travel to another country, just remember you're probably entering somewhat of a different society, and they have different traditions and different norms and standards, however you want to talk about it. So you might want to actually get some sort of, I don't know, guidebook or maybe even an actual human guide to sort of let you know about important distinctions like that, things that the people you're visiting might find offensive that wouldn't be so offensive where you're from. Social norms and etiquette vary. Eye contact, physical touch, and forms of address are interpreted differently across cultures. Of course, there are some societies where people more openly, like hug and kiss and that kind of stuff. But, on an individual level, I'm not really a touchy-feely person myself. So, if a person, touches me, even in a relatively normal way, I might be like, please don't. Though it varies, I guess it depends on what kind of mood I'm in, and who's doing it, I suppose. Like, not that I've ever attended one of these, but if an example would be like if I was attending an orgy or something, obviously you might expect people to be more likely to touch you physically. Again, not that I've ever been in one of those, but I'm just saying. That'd be sort of a dramatic example. But, deeply held cultural values and beliefs dictate what is considered respectful or offensive. For instance, individualism versus collectivism can influence how humor is received and delivered. well, it's kind of hard to come up with an example of that, but like in the United States, they they refer to it as an individualistic culture. So it's probably less likely that you're going to find successful comedians making fun of ideas like individual success, and they're probably going to more likely make fun of you know traits like empathy. As weird as that is, like they're just going to probably be more mean spirited and the kind of jokes they tell when it comes to groups of people versus the individual. Like if somebody's like a successful person, they're probably less likely to be made fun of if they're like rich. Not to say that never happens in American comedy, of course it does, but I'm just saying that overall, the idea of like picking yourself up by your bootstraps or whatever, say, the the whole capitalist mythos is probably going to be more presented favorably, and something like the social welfare state is going to be frowned upon. That's I'm sure you can find plenty of examples where that's not the case, but I'm sort of generalizing here. But the point is that also that context and timing are crucial when it comes to humor. In order to make somebody understand what you're saying, comedic timing is actually something that can make a difference, and providing the proper context is important too. Like setting things up so that even somebody who isn't necessarily the brightest or doesn't make the easiest connections could still understand it. That's really a skill that the best comedians will have. So a joke that might be funny in a casual setting could be inappropriate in a professional or formal context. That's another thing. That's why you'll find comedians telling jokes for different sorts of crowds, like if you're at a business type of event, they're probably not going to be as raunchy, as they would be in a bar or something like that. And additionally, jokes during sensitive situations can be seen as insensitive, no matter how funny they might seem, outside of that time and place. So there's individual differences in humor. As I said before, people have diverse tastes in humor. Some enjoy sarcasm or dark humor, like a dead baby joke or something like that, while others prefer light-hearted or clean jokes. And going back to the context thing, like you probably don't want to tell a dead baby joke to somebody whose baby just died. You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying? That's like a dramatic example. But, it's just to drive the point home here. Know your audience. Like if you don't want to offend somebody, then you should know who you're talking to at a given moment. So if a joke doesn't align with somebody's sense of humor, they're less likely to find it funny, obviously. And, you're probably going to damage your reputation, as I probably have in this episode, by merely mentioning the existence of dead baby jokes. So some people don't like that type of humor. And I understand why. But at the same time, it exists, and some people do find it funny. Obviously, misinterpretation also plays a significant role. The tone, facial expressions, or delivery of a joke can all influence how it's received. If the intent behind the joke is unclear, it can lead to misunderstandings. This is especially true in written communication, where the absence of vocal tone and facial expressions can lead to misinterpretation. And it's also true if you screw up a joke, like if you leave out a key part, well, the whole thing is going to fall apart. They're going to be like, what are you even talking about? And that can happen. I'm sure that even happens to the pros. or they might even miss, like a facial expression or something like that. That they're all kinds of little cues that you can deliver when you're telling a joke. And if you botch that, well, you can screw up the whole thing. And again, the comedic timing is another part of it. It can sometimes be the difference between making somebody laugh and just leaving them, you know, just waiting there. Like, what are you doing? What are you doing? And, there are psychological factors such as anxiety, depression, or other mental health issues that can affect how someone perceives humor. I already kind of suggested that, but people dealing with such issues might find it harder to see the humor in things, as their focus and energy are often consumed by their mental health challenges, whatever they are. And obviously, in this day and age, people are a little bit more mentally health conscious, or however you want to phrase it. And you might even say that things are maybe going a little bit too far in that direction. But at the same time, it's just one of those things. It's there are good aspects of it and potential for it to go too far in one way or another. The social dynamics are really important. Power dynamics and relationships influence how jokes are received. A joke from a close friend is taken differently than one from a stranger or someone in a position of authority. Like if somebody tells a sex-related joke, who's like a close friend or something, it would be different from hearing it from your boss, you know what I mean? Or from a teacher or something. And, we're getting back into the social situation stuff again, because you're probably less likely to tell a sex joke around your grandparents, or maybe even your parents, or your siblings, or whatever. Probably a little less likely to do that. I know there are some families who are a little bit more like, who cares about such things, but there are definitely people who are a little more on the, let's just say, prudish side when it comes to that. And similarly, jokes within a tight-knit group might not be well received by outsiders. Maybe your joke's an inside joke, and it's not even meant for people outside to understand, and maybe they'll be sort of pissed off that you're not letting them in on the joke, and then the joke becomes sort of like, I don't know, a tool for your elitist little club or something like that. I think we've all known a situation like that before, where we weren't in on the joke, and the joke was in that sense transformed into a form of humiliation, which is sort of a weird situation to be in. But I think a lot of people have been there before. And lastly, as I may have said before, self-esteem plays a role. So individuals with low self-esteem may feel attacked or belittled by jokes, especially if they perceive the humor as targeting their own insecurities. Their reaction isn't about the joke itself, probably, but rather about how they see themselves in relation to others. They just might feel like you're only proving that they have no value or something like that. And it's another way in which humor could basically be bullying, And you have to ask yourself, do you want to be that person who's considered a bully, or maybe that person is just being a little bit too sensitive and they're reading too much into what you're saying, and you might want to, in whatever way you can, let them know that, I didn't mean any harm by it, Maybe you can successfully recover from that situation. But understanding all of these different factors can help us in our social interactions. We can be more mindful. When we make jokes, being aware of others' feelings and backgrounds can prevent misunderstandings and foster more positive relationships, which seems like is one of the things that humor is sort of intended to do. So, boy, I've been blabbing a lot here. So, thank you for joining me today on Critical Weight Theory and one of its Mindful Moments episodes. So, I hope this episode has given you a deeper understanding of why some people might struggle to take jokes and how we can all be more considerate in our humor. If you have any thoughts or experiences to share, feel free to reach out on my social media channels. I'm on Facebook, Blue Sky, Mastodon. Let's see, I'm on Tribal under Wade Wynio. And yes, I'm still on Twitter, also known as X. Still on there. I've debated no longer using that, but I'm still on it. Long story short. So until next time, stay mindful and keep spreading kindness or something like it. All right, have a good day.